Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whenever you hear this message, I pray that you are poised to receive, to accept, and to respond to words of wisdom. Ashe. You know, there are lots of threats to our tradition, lots of potential threats. But no matter what those threats are, I consider the greatest threat to our tradition an internal threat, something that crops up from within our own ranks constantly, and it's never properly identified and therefore not fully addressed. And that is the threat of inferiority complex. We as African people have to come to grips with our inferiority complex. And when I say inferiority complex, I'm talking about the idea that in your thinking, in your training, in your habits, you have been conditioned to think and speak and do things in a way that support white supremacism. Or stated another way, you've been conditioned to think and speak and do in a way that will never be openly at variance with the agenda or the attitudes of what is comfortable for white people. You never want to make white people uncomfortable. Anytime you think or feel that your position is going to make white folks anxious, then you start trying to accommodate them. Right? So, for example, and this is the case even when white folks are not present, right? When we look at our creation story, anytime you hear something in our creation story that is at variance with, let's say, science, then you're going to immediately go to, oh, there's something wrong with our story. We need to change the narrative. Right? Batala could have never descended from a chain and come to the world with a snail shell full of soil. That's scientifically impossible. We need to change the narrative. We need to clarify that, and we need to make it so that it is suitable to the white man's logic, and it fits with the white man's narrative of how things came to be. Right? You don't look at it as an inferiority complex. You look at it as being logical or being scientific or rational, right? But the white man himself doesn't have that problem. They are Christian and scientists. They're Catholic and scientists. And they're somehow able to separate the two or approach the two in such a way that one supports the other or reinforces the other. So why can't you as a Yoruba person be scientific in such a way that it reinforces and supports your creation story? Why do you feel in the least bit inclined to change your tradition or to somehow redefine your tradition so that it is consistent with science? Right? It's inferiority. It's an inferiority complex. Another example. When our history doesn't include some kind of a link to Egypt, or we want to link ourselves because the Hindus are somehow connected to Egypt. There were two Kush, right? And the Jews are somehow connected to Egypt, and the Greeks are somehow connected to Egypt, and all these great civilizations are all connected to Egypt, and we're left out. There must be something about us that's inferior because we don't have a connection to Egypt. So let's change the narrative. And we're going to link ourselves to Egypt. And we're going to create all kinds of ridiculous stories that have no historical validity. They have no theological validity it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, right? But there are people who will continue to perpetuate this nonsense because of an inferiority complex, right? Instead of looking for all these ways to graft yourself onto those people's story, why not understand the real connections between, our civilization and other civilizations in West Africa? There are very easy connections to be made between different kingdoms of West Africa and different West African civilizations. Doesn't require that much research. Linguistically, culturally, traditionally, there's lots and lots and lots of connections. Why not satisfy yourself with the actual connection between yourself and your relatives, your known relatives? It's because of an inferiority complex, right? And more recently, one of the ways in which I see our inferiority complex cropping up and, again, diminishing the integrity of our practices and our tradition is when it comes to witchcraft. In the West, they have their own relationship to witchcraft. They, in very simple terms, you had a whole bunch of European indigenous knowledge systems. Christianity cropped up, and the Christians colonized the European world. And when they did so, they did whatever they could to wipe out the different indigenous knowledge systems. And they used the terminology of witchcraft to demonize those practices and those traditions, and they extinguished them, most of them. Okay. And so in the United States, I think perhaps across Europe, there is a resurgence. There are groups of people who want to reclaim witchcraft, and they want to define it in ways that are independent of Christianity. And so that's where you see this resurgence of paganism and Wicca and the New Age movement overall is largely driven by this interest in white people wanting to recapture their spirituality, right? And witchcraft is something that they are trying to reclaim and redefine for themselves. And so whenever there's a variance between the way we define and approach witchcraft in the Yoruba tradition and the way the New Age, Wicca, and white people are approaching their witchcraft, then automatically we assume that there's something wrong with us. We need to change our narrative. We need to be talking about witchcraft the way the white people are talking about witchcraft today, right? That is an inferiority complex, because we already have an indigenous definition of witchcraft. We already have a pre-colonial approach to witchcraft. It has nothing to do with Christianity, it has nothing to do with colonization, it has nothing to do with Islam or any of the other outside influences that people are working so hard to, attribute to our approach. The Yoruba civilization is, the Yorubas are patriarchal, and so therefore misogynist. And the way they treat witchcraft is all about oppression. And witchcraft is here to free us. That's not an indigenous Yoruba perspective. It isn't, right? And so we need to have enough real confidence in our tradition and in our civilization as a whole to be able to reject the all the foreign narratives. If it's the creation story and it having to be somehow grafted onto science, if it's our relationship to ancient Kemet, or if it's witchcraft, or if it's anything else, it needs to be okay for other people to have their story, and we not feel somehow that we are less than if our story isn't more of their story than their story, right? We've got to be more. That's an inferiority complex. And we need to let it go because it is completely destroying our tradition from the inside out, because it's corrosive. It creates a lot of confusion and unnecessary doubt, right? And so one of the projects that I'm working on right now is specifically pointed at our treatment of witchcraft and our approach to witchcraft. And so I'm looking at, not the new age reworking of witchcraft. I'm not looking at pagan witchcraft. I'm not looking at Wicca and witchcraft. Those things have nothing to do with our tradition. I'm looking at what the Yoruba people themselves understand about witchcraft. Psychologically, right? Socially, linguistically, how do the Yoruba approach and define witchcraft? Because that is the true source. It's the indigenous approach to witchcraft that we need to understand and we need to appreciate and fully respect if we're going to practice our tradition authentically and not be calling ourselves Isheshe devotees, but actually practicing Wicca. We're going to call ourselves Orisa devotees and be practicing paganism. We're going to call ourselves Orisa devotees, but be practicing Christianity. That just is leading to a kind of a religious schizophrenia that isn't why we came to this tradition in the first place. So I want you to keep your eyes open for this upcoming project. It's going to break very soon, and I really look forward to the conversation. I know it's going to spark a lot of really deep conversation, and in the end, however, I know that it will help us to actually follow through on the mandate of Olodumare as Enya to help bring about the good condition for ourselves and for those who we're destined to serve. So I look forward to chatting with you soon. Bye for now. Odabo.